Recording in progress.
Hola a todos, bienvenidos. Lo siento que se escucha un eco. Le quiero dar la bienvenida a la doctora Lilliam Gorman, que es profesora asociada del Departamento de Español y Portugués y directora de Spanish as a Heritage Language en la Universidad de Arizona. Bienvenida a Spanish Series en UNM.
Can you hear me okay? I unmuted myself, so hopefully there's no echoing. Brisa, thank you. Marty, thank you. Gracias al Departamento de Español y Portugués de aquí de la Universidad de México, which is my home too, because it's my alma mater for my bachelor's and my master's, and I'm always happy to be here. And I'm happy to be here in person because it's home. So thank you for having me. And I'm excited to just chat with you a little bit about some ongoing projects that I have, some ongoing research that I have, and also just kind of evaluate the moment that we're in and the role that Spanish as a heritage language plays in that moment, because we can't ignore our everyday realities right now and how difficult these last couple years have been for the work that we do. And the work that we do in Spanish as a heritage language is not limited to the classroom. It's not limited to academia. So that's why it's important for me, at least, to feel like, okay, what am I doing in this moment to kind of honor the difficulties that our heritage learners, our Latino students, ourselves are having right now in higher ed. So that's why I titled my presentation, Honoring Our Roots, Building Our Future, Continued Presence, Continued Resistance, and Decolonial Possibilities in the Spanish as a Heritage Language Program. Do that. It's all right. Yeah, and happy May Day. I know you're all here, which, it's a kind of a day to be respecting workers and not be working and not be at school and, honoring the history of May Day and in Chicago and everything that the history represents for us as workers. So I just want to recognize that. But that's also why the title of my talk is about resistance, and it's about the role that we play in that, because it goes so much broader than just, what we're doing here at the university. So thinking about the difficult times that we're in, it was definitely reinforcing the sometimes not very explicit, but now explicit push towards monolingualism, push towards monoglossic ideologies that this country has when President Trump designated English as the official language of the United States, which we all know that the US doesn't have an official language. So this type of performative action around kind of making it seem that we have an official language, hurts us as our people, right? Hurts those of us who speak minority languages or who are trying to recover our minority languages. But at the same time, we have things like this in New Mexico, right? So we have this balance where we have New Mexico House Bill 487 last April from the New Mexico Public Education Department talking about adding Spanish heritage language protection and preservation to the Hispanic Education Act, right? So you have these type of actions countering the things that happen on the national level, which speaks to the ways that spaces like New Mexico, and I'm going to show you also in Arizona, can resist these monoglossic ideologies and have always done so. However, we don't necessarily know what things like this look like on a daily basis. Like, how is this playing out? And I think that the answer to that is within our Spanish as a heritage language spaces. And I, of course, want to speak to the moment as well when we have these national discourses, a year later after that declaration of English only, as English being the official language, where you have this sense that Spanish isn't an American language, when we know our scholars like Rosina Lozano talk about the fact that Spanish is an American language and always has been. And you have this push against national global icons like Bad Bunny performing all in Spanish, and the fact that Spanish is viewed as something foreign when we know it's not. So we have all these moments colliding. And what do we do with these moments in these difficult kind of daily realities? We have things happening at our universities. This was shocking. Well, shocking and not shocking with everything that's happening in Texas with ethnic and gender studies being consolidated into one school, all the work and all the labor that has happened through the civil rights movement and beyond to establish these departments, which Spanish as a heritage language came out of, right? So Spanish as a heritage language classroom has persisted and resisted from the beginning. And what does that look like? I always put seguimos aquí, porque seguimos aquí como Spanish as a heritage language también, ¿verdad? Like es something that's been here. It's not new, especially in this space, the University of New Mexico, that is the oldest program in the country, right? So today's chat, I want to talk a little bit about the historical trajectory of Spanish as a heritage language classroom in this context of persistence and resistance, and emphasize the importance of this pedagogical space in this current political moment. I'm working on this kind of decolonial framework that I'm referencing in several of my my articles that are in process right now, for a borderlands pedagogy of place within the Spanish as a heritage language curriculum, which really is a way for us to think through how we honor our history as Spanish as a heritage language, of this history of resistance and persistence, and what it might look like in the future to continue this trajectory of resistance and persistence in the Spanish as a heritage language classroom, and also thinking through ideas of home and heritage. What do we mean by heritage, and the debate around, not debate, but the thoughts around, well, is this stuck in the past, or what does it mean? How can we kind of re-semantify heritage, to not necessarily be speaking only to the past, which we do, right? We do in practice in our classrooms, but how can we be more explicit about that? Because it does draw on persistence and resistance, and centering US Latinx lived experiences in the classroom, and in my larger project of centering our histories, our long history and legacy of having US Latino Spanish heritage learners as instructors, particularly in the space that we're in right here. So I'm drawing on several projects. I have one article that I referenced today that's speaking to the larger history of Southern Arizona's critical language pedagogies and persistence and resistance in that context, because many times we don't think of Arizona as being very resistant when it's the only state that still has an English-only law, that's affected a whole generation of students who are in our classrooms now. I also have a forthcoming article, How to be a Chicana SHL Director, a Testimonio of Heritage Language Experience, Language Recovery, and Decolonial Possibility, that kind of references Michelle Serros's How to be a Chicana Role Model, and taking kind of that step-by-step instruction manual approach to my experience and what that looks like, from a decolonial possibility framework. I have an article with a colleague around place, language, and Latinx identity through critical land-based, or critical place-based pedagogies in the SHL curriculum. And then my larger project where I'm continuing to collect testimonials of Spanish heritage learner instructors. So those who are serving as instructors or have served as instructors who had been in Spanish as a heritage language classes, to show this long trajectory and this kind of invisible archive that we have in the field of Spanish as a heritage language. So I'm going to shift over next door to Arizona to talk about the fact that Spanish as a heritage language many times isn't seen as having a long trajectory in all of the Southwest. In New Mexico, sí, pero en Arizona, no. But it's actually not true. We actually have in Southern Arizona quite a history of resistance and kind of the birth of the bilingual education movement, which really wasn't different from Spanish as a heritage language in the 60s and the 70s. We don't have these divisions coming about until later. But you have students, right, in Arizona, like this is one of my students, talking about the legacy of linguistic oppression and linguistic dispossession. But it's so empowering for these students to hear about that. It hasn't always been this way in Southern Arizona. Southern Arizona does have a radical history of defending linguistic and cultural rights. It was demonstrated very beautifully through Tucson Unified School District's Mexican American Studies program that was outlawed, and then that was overturned, thankfully, but still it did the damage. But it was a place where students were looking at culture and language in the high school system, and it was such a beautiful curriculum. But there's a 60-year history of developing cutting-edge Spanish as a heritage language courses at the high school and university levels in Southern Arizona. And there was quite a conversation happening between New Mexico and Arizona back in the 60s, spearheaded by Adalberto Guerrero and Maria Urquidez, and those who were part of this commission to kind of investigate what was going on in New Mexico, Texas, California, Arizona, as far as teaching Spanish to the Spanish-speaking at the K through 12 level. So you have Adalberto Guerrero, who started the first high school level heritage language classes in 1959, and then started the first Spanish as a heritage language classes at the university level at the University of Arizona in 1965. We do know, however, those classes existed here at the University of New Mexico before that, and I'm always proud to say that. But this was kind of the preludes to what we know as Spanish as a heritage language. This Pacemaker Award that Pueblo High School in Tucson received in 1965 really brought forth this notion of Tucson being at the center of the bilingual education move. Before the Bilingual Education Act, you have all of these efforts to document what's going on and to document what needs to happen as far as serving Latinos in the US, particularly in the Southwest. So you have the Tucson National Education Association survey on the teaching of Spanish to the Spanish speaking that generated this invisible minority report, which you can Google and you can find the whole PDF, which was this amazing document that has so many of the recommendations that we still recommend today for Spanish as a heritage language, coming out in 1965, kind of the competencies that the instructors should have, the fact that it's really important for the instructors to have the same experiences as the students, the fact that we need to have this interdisciplinary curriculum that's not simply focused on grammar and doesn't need to come just from linguists, that should actually be centered around literature and cultural studies and education. All the things that we know are helpful now, but many times we lose our way from that in the trajectory of Spanish as a heritage language. So you have all of these things coming from these efforts and this resistance and persistence from the 1960s that was in dialogue with what was happening here in New Mexico as well. And all of this led to the Bilingual Education Act, led to NABE, the National Association for Bilingual Ed, led to strengthening the American Association of Teachers in Spanish and Portuguese, and also speaks to the fact that bilingual ed and Spanish as a heritage language weren't these separate kingdoms as I feel they are now, where you have education and you have Spanish departments that should be talking to each other and many times do, but a lot of times don't. Back then, it was just about we're serving, at least in this Tucson context that spilled over into the larger Southwest, we were talking about what do we need to do to serve our Latino students? What do we need to do to serve our heritage learners? So that's kind of where I like to go with this prelude. I also like to look at, okay, let's look at our histories. Let's honor our roots, right? These are a lot of people from here, right? That we can talk about Spanish heritage language leaders who were Spanish heritage learners, right? We have Sabino Liwarri, we have Erlinda Gonzalez Berry, we have Malia Dolores Gonzalez, Loreto Salazar from New Mexico Highlands, Patricia Cano, who was at Western New Mexico University. Damian and I went to school with a lot of these people, right? We have John Ledoux, who was at Santa Fe Community College, and Adalberto Guerrero, my only Arizona person there, who is 96, 97 now, and who we still have events with and at the University of Arizona, and we honor him in meaningful ways as much as we can, although just to bring back to the reality of what's going on now, spaces like the Adalberto and Ana Guerrero Student Center, which is our Latino Student Center at University of Arizona, have been defunded and consolidated in moves to disempower with, DEI and all these things. So we have continued efforts to maintain these spaces that were started by these Spanish as a heritage language heroes that we still have to continue to fight for today. We have, 50 years of fighting that just got defunded, over a few months. So thinking about this long trajectory that we have, and the Seguimos Aquí, rethinking heritage home in America, like our Spanish as a heritage language is not stuck in the past, right? Agnes Hay talks about that heritage actually can mean recontextualizing the past, transforming the present, and pre-contextualizing the future. When you're talking about Spanish or heritage languages overall, she's talking about Chinese as a heritage language. But when we're looking at how we can bring some activism and bring some action and bring some, present day energy into the idea of heritage and what we do in Spanish as a heritage language. And this all kind of leads me to this framework that we propose in some of the work that me and my colleague Gabi Yocupicio are working on around this borderlands pedagogy of place is a way for us to think through heritage and a way for us to think through a decolonial framework of Spanish as a heritage language that allows us to maintain the resistance and persistence within the SHL classroom. So I like to bring forth these connections to place, right? We all know the term querencia, and you'll have your lovely querencia events all the time here in the Spanish as a heritage or the Spanish department. But the idea of having a love of place and connecting language practices to a sense of home and a sense of place allows us to think through ways that we connect to our language differently, how it can be connected to an actual place, but it can also move with us. And it should be a part of critical language awareness. It really is. It's not often explicitly discussed, but when we have Baudry and Losa telling us that CLA is a theoretical and pedagogical framework to correct social injustices and ways that we can kind of use criticality to understand discrimination and have a positionality against it, being connected to a place and to a trajectory of work in that place around Spanish as a heritage language is important, and it plays a really important role, I think, in critical language awareness. So we're just working to kind of be explicit about things that we know we're already doing in the classroom, right? Through thinking through meeting the needs of heritage learners through place-based pedagogies. And relational pedagogy, relational actividades, relational places, right? So many times we have instructors and students who aren't all from the same place, but the fact that they put their Latino places and spaces into conversation with each other, even if it's simply people who share Albuquerque as a place, but their herencia, their heritage may be from Chihuahua or maybe from Peñasco, but we can put those into conversation with each other in the same ways that in Chicago we do that with our students from Mexico, our students from Puerto Rico, who are all from the city of Chicago, but we put our relational Latinidades into conversation with each other. And there's power in that, and there's querencia in that as well, in creating a US Latino home place. So all of these things I view as decolonial, and my scholar colleagues like Merida Rua and Gina Perez and Lorena Garcia and Frances Aparicio do the same, right? Like putting our place-based identities and our experiences with each other as Latinos into conversation with each other is decolonial, and it disrupts these colonial structures within Spanish departments, within universities, and within our country. And one way that I propose to do that is by studying the understudied archive of testimonials and the invisible legacy of Spanish heritage language learners who have engaged in their own process of language recovery to then become instructors in Spanish heritage language programs. It's a language revitalization journey that many times is invisibilized because it's simply like, oh, you're an instructor now, so you're part of this larger Spanish department, which is great. But let's make very visible what that journey looked like and how that can actually impact our students. Again, we're already kind of doing this, right? I did this as a heritage learner instructor. Damian did this heritage learner instructor. Carmela did this as a heritage learner instructor, but we haven't documented these type of moves. So why is it important, right? Well, highlighting the narratives honors the complex identities of heritage learners that have been impacted by intergenerational language dispossession and linguistic terrorism. And we know that generally Latinos have been historically erased and many times continue to be erased from Spanish departments. Definitely not the case here at University of New Mexico in that curriculum-wise. I always thought it was the norm that everywhere represented Chicano, Latino, Peninsular, Latin American, linguistics, all of it in the Spanish department. And I had a rude awakening when I left UNM and went to other Spanish departments and realized, hey, like you have to really fight for the Latino to be present in these departments and to show that it belongs in these departments. And also that it's always been there in some ways. So Lehman, Aparicio, others like Ofelia Garcia have also spoken about that. So when we reinsert this archive and these understudied experiences of Latino heritage learner instructors who've gone through heritage programs and are now teaching heritage students or have taught heritage students, then we're able to insert our presence and kind of turn that narrative on its head that Latino literature, cultural studies, Southwest studies, all these things don't belong in a Spanish department. So it also allows us to be able to put language experiences into dialogue with each other. Martinez and Train talk about what a language experience is, which is helpful when looking at kind of a holistic view of how Latino language practices live in our daily lives. But if we put those language experiences into conversation with each other, then we have this move that is also decolonial. So that's kind of where I'm going with kind of the theoretical backgrounds of this work. It builds on previous work. Stephanie Alvarez has done amazing work evaluating Spanish departments and how they educate Latinos and the role of or the lack of Latino representation in Spanish departments and Latino curriculum. Briseño, Mojica, Munoz as well. Bustamante, Novella. A lot of these are coming out of K through 12 or at least high school experiences. Nancy Dominguez Fret as well, looking at the experiences of Latino teachers who have gone through bilingual programs and are now teaching heritage language learners in the high school level. So you have this growing body of knowledge around this, but I think we need more. So that's why I'm talking about how do instructors describe their own language recovery process, and how do these US Latino instructors position themselves in relation to their students and to US Spanish departments through the gathering of these narratives. And as a way to, again, establish our long-term presence and our future in Spanish departments. So I talk about using critical autoethnography, and that's kind of the piece that I have coming out, where it's really focusing on my own testimonio about being a heritage language learner, instructor, professor, director in a Spanish department and an HSI. What does all that mean? And following, like I said, Michelle Cedros's How to Be a Chicana Role Model. So using critical ethnography, this is not an objective study. This is me coming from my background and my positionality, working with other heritage learners who are coming from similar positionalities. So that's why I really build on Delgado Bernal's notion of cultural intuition, coming out of Chicana feminist epistemologies, again, testimonio, pláticas as methodologies, methods and methodologies and ways that we can gather this knowledge that feels like it's, not just feels like, but that is reciprocal and that does feel co-constructed with participants, the co-construction of conversations. So the way that I gathered these narratives was really through pláticas, right? They were conversations that were built together that didn't really necessarily have a set of questions. That was really, let's talk about, our language experiences and how this came about, your interest in Spanish as a heritage language, your background in Spanish as a heritage language, and then let it go from there. So really building from Fierros and Delgado Bernal and Saavedra and Izquierdo, which again is coming from education. It's not coming from linguistics or from Spanish departments. So this is why we have to be working together with these fields, right? As of now, I have 15 colleagues, current and former instructors, who in some cases are current or former graduate students, who have participated in the gathering of these pláticas, both in the Arizona and the New Mexico context. All are self-identified as Hispanic, Chicano, Latino, Mexicano, ranging in ages from 23 to 70. So it's important. Like, this is not just young graduate students now. We have 6 from Arizona, Sonora borderlands, northern New Mexico, southern New Mexico, central western New Mexico, 1 from Phoenix, 1 from Denver. But the Denver individual has roots in San Luis Valley, so that's why it's considered the larger, greater northern New Mexico area. There's important themes that are coming out from these pláticas, and it's ongoing. So obviously this isn't an article yet, but just to kind of show you the different narratives that are emerging, right? The ideas that the instructors or the former instructors are telling me about experience can be a pedagogical tool, right? Again, we do this already, we know this, but the idea that we can write about it and document it, thinking we were stupid because we didn't know all the rules of the language. I want my students to know that I felt that way too, that I didn't feel like I knew anything about the language of my home or the language that my grandparents used until I was actually in the classroom myself. And many times until I was actually teaching the language. So the fact that I was a heritage learner myself made me understand their experiences, making them proud of the Spanish they spoke and not trying to destroy it. And also being able to identify with these different frameworks for bilingual education, right? We know that many bilingual education programs are not bilingual and they're about English only, and the goal is English only. And that's the case in Tucson, where bilingual ed's been eliminated, but it used to be called bilingual ed, these ESL classes. It's a case in Chicago where many times it's viewed as a remedial class that is kind of what you want to get out of as quick as you can. And one of the participants talking about, everyone in my ESL classes was from Tucson and English was their dominant language. So the ways that they can identify with these racialized and discriminatory ways of being placed in these classes in the first place that then limit their academic opportunities was a sense of connection that many of these instructors discussed, especially the ones from Arizona, talking about representing an experience and being able to talk about the politics of language and power, which is what critical language awareness is centered on in our classrooms, right? Being able to talk about the sense of community, and also being able to talk about the dynamics in the classroom. Many times the instructors that I spoke with we have a 300 level heritage language class that many times our online placement tool and AP scores will put students who probably maybe even did some high school in Sonora or in Hermosillo or in some of the places in the borderlands in these 300 level classes, and they need to take them, but they're mixed with students who came up through our beginning heritage learner classes. And a lot of times when you have a heritage instructor, heritage learner who is a heritage instructor, they get challenged by some of the students in the class. Like, what are you doing here teaching me this? And so being able to navigate that and negotiate that, we have a lot of documentation of that going on. And reframing proper Spanish, correct Spanish, and what the students are really there to learn, because many times the students come in with a kind of this already set idea of what the class is supposed to look like and what learning is supposed to look like. And then being able to share your own insecurities about, I don't know all the rules either. I'm learning with you, but it's not about me being this I'm not like the banking system by Friday, right? I'm not depositing all this information in you for you then to then give it back to me. We're learning together. So being able to have that freedom to share insecurities, because the confidence is not just about giving the students confidence, but the instructors being vulnerable about their issues with their linguistic insecurities. So those are kind of where it's been headed as far as what they're documenting, and then transformations in the instructors themselves in identifying with the term heritage. I've had some instructors that are from the borderlands who went to school between Tucson and Nogales, Sonora, and talk about the fact that they didn't like the term heritage because they felt like it didn't encapsulate their experience because they knew more. Like somebody whose heritage was remedial. And then the instructors later talking about, no, actually, I embrace it now, right? This is something that I feel identified with because of how it allows for transformation, and it allows for us to think about present and futures, right? And one way that we think about heritage in our program and in the work that I'm doing is that it's not just about recapturing something from the past and trying to sound like somebody who we remember speaking Spanish to us, our grandparents. Like, it's coming to terms with the fact that we're not going to sound like our grandparents. Maybe we're not going to sound like I'm not going to speak the Northern New Mexico dialect that my grandparents spoke. I would like to, and I can maybe perform it a little bit, but I'm going to sound different because I was dispossessed from my language and I've had to recover it differently, and being okay with that. And so that's the kind of energy that we're putting into the term heritage. But also the journeys as graduate students, right? They can't shed their identities as graduate students when they're in these classes. And when they're in these Spanish departments, so many times they don't feel like they are viewed as competent in their graduate classes in Spanish departments, right? So sometimes we have some of the students talking about having conflicts with other students in their classes. The same linguistic hierarchies that we're teaching our students about in their classrooms, our graduate student instructors who are heritage learners are also experiencing in their graduate classes, or from professors themselves who are replicating these linguistic hierarchies and ideas of linguistic authenticity. So what's the importance of this? What are the implications? Well, when the instructor is also a heritage learner, it's imperative to put their language experience into conversation with those of the students. So that's actually explicitly important to be doing in the classroom. Those are some of the conclusions I'm drawing from here. And the idea of linguistic inheritance and centering sociolinguistic justice in order to advance critical language education in the classroom and the community, like this is one way to do that. This is one way that it has been done and can continue to be done. And it asserts the presence of Latinos in Spanish departments and the field of Spanish as a heritage language from its inception as instructors and program directors. So this isn't new. It's not new to have somebody who's come through the program to then be an instructor. Like, we actually have a history of being people who started these programs. They may not be the most known scholars, but in communities, many times that's what happened. So it's important to document that history as well, and to be clear that this work in Spanish as a heritage language isn't about one particular academic path or one particular academic preparation. It's about having the critical language awareness and the critical pedagogies all together, with also including ethnic studies, including Chicano studies, Latino studies, all those things that make the work that we do so big and so impactful outside of disciplines within our academic institutions. So the archive of testimonials themselves, for me, are a model of decolonizing Spanish as a heritage language, because it makes visible the production of knowledge of these, what I call critical Latinx heritage language leaders. They're not just students who then became instructors, but they're actual leaders. Also highlights the importance of confronting harmful language ideologies, legacies of exclusion, and the elevation of bilingual hegemonic whiteness from within Spanish departments. so I don't mean to be so down on Spanish departments, but Spanish departments can be pretty toxic throughout the country, right? So we know that these spaces are rife with, and this isn't me talking, this is Guadalupe Valdez talking, this is Ofelia Garcia, this is Lehman, this is Nelson Flores, these are all these scholars who have had important work that document, Stephanie Alvarez, this type of subverting of the knowledge of our own Latinos in our departments. So for us to elevate this knowledge, it's important for us to be thinking beyond disciplines. And that's kind of where I talk about this decolonial framework also is about elevating Chicano Latino studies, blurring of disciplinary divides between literature, linguistics, cultural studies, bilingual ed. It's impossible to separate these things in our own experiences, right? Because we have had, it's been through Chicano literature that we've heard voices of Chicano poets or Latino narratives that have like been what we've gone through, right? Like me hearing Sabino Ibarri here, or me hearing Michelle Cerros, like these things inform how we approach language and how we feel identified. And it insists on the cultivation of sites of support for these groups of people, right? So it's not just, oh, let's create a pipeline of Spanish heritage language learners who can then be instructors. Let's support them and transform the actual system that they are teaching in and the types of support that we provide. So it's continuous work, and I'm continuing to gather these narratives that I've been gathering since 2020. So I'd love to chat with anybody, and Damian, somebody I haven't chatted with yet, so I'd love to talk with you and gather your narrative as well. I'm just putting that in there. I've already talked with Carmela years ago, but it's important to document, what we've been doing for these many years. The continuous work of exploring alternative potentials, right? Created and embodied by critical Latinx SHL leaders. So I really see these SHL leaders as embodying the struggle of borders that Ansaldúa discusses and turning the narrative on its head in Spanish departments and in SHL and in this country. And these reiteration of monoglossic ideologies and monolingualism. Spanish as a heritage language space is a place that's never accepted that and should never accept that, right? So seguimos aquí. Again, going back to Agnes Hay, to learn one's heritage language means not merely to inherit one's heritage language and maintain one heritage cultural identity, but also to transform the heritage language. And I think that's the power to recreate one's identity. We're not trying to replicate something from the past or to try and be and sound just like our grandparents, as much as I would like to, because I unfortunately had a different path and I wasn't, we were dispossessed and linguistically terrorized out of our languages. And I also really like what Fowlis and Jillian say in 2023 in their work about establishing the Spanish as a heritage language, or really creating an entire Spanish department that reflects Spanish as a heritage language at Texas A&M San Antonio, that the work and possibilities of designing programs informed by Latinx studies perspectives, as well as culturally and linguistic sustaining pedagogies to teach heritage language learners demands that we prioritize local knowledge and U.S. Spanishes, right? And that we resist whiteness and coloniality that predominate in many university language programs. And I think that this is one way to do that. Goodness, yes. That was quicker than I thought, but that was 36. I know there's, we have some minutes for chatting, and I know there was something upstairs that we were told that they needed to get to, so.
Wow, Lillian, it brings joy to my heart to have you saying these things, and it's just so awesome. I love your talk, and it's so relevant. We have an SHL seminar right now, and most of the class is sitting here with us, and oh man, I got real with them last night. I don't know, I did not have my normal boundaries of like, not sharing information. We're just down. We're talking about how, the constant struggle, and it's like, and they were like, oh, wow, and they were feeling kind of bad about the department, right? And I was like, no, this is everywhere.
Yeah, it's not.
La causa nunca comenzó y nunca terminó. La causa es eterno, right? And so, I love that you're kind of shining a light on that. And it's not easy. I was even showing them a document that Gabby has seen where in order to expand our offerings, I had to literally document that the L2 program had like 45% of their students had SHL, placement results, and yet, why are they
Why aren't they in the classes?
Why aren't they letting me expand? And so,
yeah.
And so I love this, but do you have any suggestions? Like, have you done, because I have done all kinds of things. I know that my wonderful colleague Gabi is now in the same boat. Do you have suggestions for how do you successfully do this. I mean, this is one of the hard things about getting into critical pedagogies is like, it sounds great, but like, how do we get in there and like push, our departments? How do we take a steps towards the decolonial aspects? Do you have any stories to share?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, so it is continuous work, right? And things have kind of been, it's this sense of you're making all this progress and you're doing all these great things, and then bam, like 2025, DEI, like all these things happen that then you now aren't allowed or don't have the funding to do all the things you were doing before, to have the voice that you had before. And I really think it's on us to not depend on the structures within the department. Yes, we need them and we need the placement processes, but we also have to work around them when they're not working for us, which is definitely what's been happening with us as well, right? It makes no sense at the University of Arizona that we still have so many heritage learners outside of our heritage program, right? And it's the constant struggle of education. But you think you've educated all the advisors, or you've educated everybody in your department about it. You think everybody's on board, and then you realize that they're not, or that there's new advisors, or that they have other agendas. So the way that I know that this is a big question. I don't have any like quick answers, but it's creating the space between us, right?
Yeah.
It's creating this critical space that's outside of these institutional structures for us to be thinking and dreaming and looking to see how we can do things differently outside of the structures that are there. An example, we had this amazing grant. It was an HSI grant that was called the Adelante grant, that was huge, that was throughout the English department, the Spanish department, and it was all focused on the same population of students, right? It was the students who were taking like an English 101 class, but it was a Borderlands writing class. So it was a section that was designated really for Latino heritage learner students. And then we have the Spanish as a heritage language classes. And we were all working together with this amazing pot of money to create readiness for the career readiness for the students, to create this community among them where they felt like they were gaining community service learning as well as career readiness. It was just a multi-pronged approach that was amazing. And then it all got defunded. And so it got taken away. And now me and the instructor and the director of the Borderlands writing program, amazing local writer, Melanie Martinez, who used to dance flamenco here with the Hastros in the very first iteration, but she's a Tuzonense. Like we know each other from a while back, but we're now working together to say, okay, all this has been taken away. We don't have the structures we used to have, and your department doesn't support placement of the Latino students in the Borderlands writing program. And my college is putting up barriers for us to do placement and for us to keep sections open longer so that, they don't get flagged for low enrollment and closed earlier and all these things. So what can we do together to get around these systems? So there's just thinking outside of the structures of the department sometimes is what's necessary, because our structures aren't going to save us because they weren't built for us in the first place. But I know that's also abstract and not very concrete, but I do find it helpful to have the spaces with the heritage instructors, right? Because you're all on the same page there, right? Luckily, in our institution, everybody who teaches in the program has to take my heritage pedagogy class. So they've all been oriented around critical language awareness and these histories and ethnic studies and all the things that they need to have to go into the classroom. And we have constant contact, right? We have our biweekly meetings and our monthly program meetings. And these spaces to me are sacred, in that this is where we are able to do the work and strategize and not be dependent on a department or a college to do it, but also to think through how can we work in these structures. So it's this back and forth of how do we work outside the structures to sustain us, and how do we stay with it, find innovative ways to work within the structures to still gain the enrollment and reach our students.
Tengo una pregunta práctica. Seguido se cree en algunos departamentos de español que una clase de Seychelles debe ser como una clase de español como segunda lengua o como lengua extranjera, pero sabemos que no es así. ¿Cuál sería alguna recomendación o algo que tú les enseñas a tus TAs que deben implementar en clases de Seychelles? O tal vez, ¿cuáles son algunos temas importantes que se deben traer a conversación en una clase de Seychelles?
Ok, no escuché la primera parte, perdón, de tu
A veces se
pregunta.
cree que en una clase de Seychelles debe ser como una clase de segunda lengua.
O como de pura gramática.
Sí.
Ajá.
¿Cuál sería un consejo práctico para un nuevo TA de Seychelles, que es algo que debe implementar o hablar con sus estudiantes?
En cuanto al curriculum y los temas que cubren, bueno, lo que hacemos en nuestro programa es empezamos en donde estamos, right? So el curriculum is totally Tucson para la primera clase, right? Our beginning class is donde estamos y de donde somos. And many times that's the same place and many times it's not. So that's our very place-based class, even though there's place-based throughout the entire curriculum. But we have this sense of, okay, we're talking about, yes, we're integrating how to describe something, how to use the present tense by describing Tucson, by going to, they have to map out Latino restaurants in the city and then propose a new restaurant and a new menu. They have to map out the murals that are throughout Tucson and then describe those and then create a new mural. We have this ongoing project with one of our community partners. Well, it's kind of stalled right now, but where they have this Tucson coloring book that they created, these artists, and how can you create captions in Spanish for this color, bilingual captions for this coloring book because it doesn't have any text? And then how can you add a new place that you would feature there with a new caption? So the point is, it's never about like la gramática in sí, right? It's contextualized, which I know everybody does here as well. But the idea is, it's not about us learning grammatical rules, because we know from what we've talked about with about the class being centered on that, because we know that language learning for heritage learners has to address other things. And we know from way back from the workings of Gonzalez Berry in the 70s and Valdez in 1981, like you have this is a language arts approach class, right? This is not about necessarily focusing on verb drills or, grammar drills and things like that. So we have a topic that kind of is the main theme for each class so that they see it kind of as a progression. So then the next class after that, the advanced beginning class, is based on different Latino communities throughout the US. And their final project is a corrido that Carmela did. We still have kept that project that Carmela designed for us. That was a beautiful kind of corrido type project that we've kind of digitized as well and made more into digital humanities. And then the next class is US Latino popular culture, mostly music, US Latino popular music. So we've taken the themes and then integrated the grammar in there, where they have outcomes that they produce with writing that's based on their level, right? But that are digital projects or community-based projects that they can see, that we try and scaffold it for them and then show them explicitly, this is how you're learning. Because many times they come in and they want that grammar, or they think they need that, which they're going to get it, but they're not going to get it in the way that they expect it, because they've only ever been taught a certain way, especially if they come out of high school Spanish classes that are very not critical, not taking critical pedagogical perspectives.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because I've come to the conclusion that like grammar does not stick in the long-term memory, whereas critical experiences do.
They do, but the students resist it many times too. Like we do have to like work with them on rethinking what the language classroom is.
¿Cómo integran los proyectos basados en la comunidad? Estoy muy interesada en eso, en conectar los programas con la comunidad, clases específicas. ¿Cómo lo hacen ustedes?
So it's kind of like I identify the community partners that I think align well with what we do, and then also that are easy to work with, that I have easy access to first, right? And then I usually brainstorm, like, for example, the artist collective that we work with, it's called Galeria Mitotera. I meet with them to discuss, like, what are some things that you're doing, or what are the work that you're doing? This is what we're doing. How can we do something together that works for both of us, and that's something that is reciprocal? Because they have work that they do with the elders in South Tucson, and they have work that they do. They generally, for all of University of Arizona classes, are open to doing mural tours and art tours and things like that. So they'll do that, but then we want our students to contribute something back to them. So it's identifying the reciprocal opportunities with different community partners that align with the topics we're talking about, the themes of each class. So it's little by little, and it's just kind of like, it's taken a while to kind of establish, and now we're kind of needing to re-establish some of them, because they just approved that they're eliminating for all the basic or the lower division Spanish, they're eliminating a class, whether it's heritage or non-heritage, like they're eliminating a class. So we're having to reform kind of what we're doing now, but it's kind of constant work in identifying the community partners and the projects that work. And it's not easy to do it like from one semester to another. It's very overwhelming, right? To think, I want to do this for every single class. Like right now, I think we only have maybe two reciprocal, meaningful relationships, or in 2 of the courses, 2 out of our 6. So it's always constant work, I guess is what I'm saying. So let's talk more about it, because I also like to do, we have things going between different, like I had one of my colleagues who worked at the, who works at the City Colleges of Chicago at Harold Washington College. We had a whole Crossing Latinidades project with them as well. So I think that it can be, doesn't have to always be local. You can be working in these other kind of exchange. And I don't just mean conversation exchanges. I mean like actual meaningful work where they had to map out their neighborhoods in Chicago, and then the students in Tucson mapped out theirs to talk about borders and to talk about the different spaces, and actually produce something that the Chicago students could say, oh, I don't even know what Tucson looks like, or I don't even know what the Latino places and spaces would be like there. And then of course my Tucson students have no idea that there's more Mexicans in Chicago than anywhere else except LA. So like they get to learn that too. So that type of knowledge production, we've had it where they read some of the common texts. They've read a text that's more based in the Southwest, and a text like I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, and then they talk about those together through the Chicago context. And so that's just, I thought about those 2 contexts because those are my 2 areas, along with New Mexico, that I generally work through. So I think we can be creative. That's why I'm saying let's do something with our students together, where we're community partners together. Yeah.
Sé que te tienes que ir a varias personas te quieren hablar en persona y que tal vez firmen los libros. Por eso vamos a ver libros. Por eso vamos a dar por tanto. Nos encantaría que volvieras en el otoño, y también uno de los comentarios en el chat es que les encanta tu plática, nos encantó a todos. Muchas gracias, gracias por compartir, y ojalá vuelvas en el otoño para que hables con nuestros TAs de Seychelles. Además.
Claro que sí.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Okay. Tenemos